Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. We use idioms literally all the time, completely taking for granted where they actually came from. But the second you start digging into their roots, it's like a giant puzzle revealing these fascinating stories about human history. Today, we're putting on our linguistic detective hats to uncover the surprisingly deep and, let's be real, pretty quirky history behind one very specific, very common phrase: stick one's oar in. To kick off this historical journey, let's ground it in a totally relatable modern-day problem. Be honest, do you know a nosy Parker who just constantly interrupts with uninvited opinions? I mean, maybe it's that one coworker who absolutely loves to tell you exactly how to do your job, or an acquaintance who's always dropping unsolicited life advice. We all know someone like this, right? It's a completely universal human frustration. And, well, as it turns out, our ancestors found this exact same behavior just as annoying as we do today. So let's nail down exactly what we're talking about here. Just stick one's oar in simply means to offer unsolicited advice, opinions, or assistance in a situation, and usually in a way that's super intrusive or just plain annoying. Now, because this is a classic idiom, a direct word-for-word translation doesn't really give away the secret. If you just look at the words, you'd think, oh, this is literally a story about boating. But idioms rely on shared cultural knowledge. That's exactly why they can be incredibly confusing for non-native speakers, but so fascinating for us to break down.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how much the phrasing is morphed over time. It definitely hasn't stayed static since it first showed up in the English language. Sometimes you'll hear people say, put one's oar in, and other times it's stick in your oar. But if we go back even further, the phrase actually used to be quite a bit longer. It was to have an oar in every man's boat. I absolutely love that version. I mean, it paints this perfect picture of someone who just cannot mind their own business and absolutely has to be involved in everyone else's affairs.
So, why an oar? Let's think about the practical nautical origin for a second. Picture a team of rowers in a boat. To actually get anywhere, they have to work in perfect coordinated harmony, right? Every single stroke has to be timed. Now imagine someone just randomly jamming an extra, totally uncoordinated oar right into the water. Instead of helping, it completely wrecks the efficiency of the rowers. It causes splashing, it throws off the entire rhythm, and it might literally steer the boat off course. It is the absolute perfect physical symbol for unwanted meddling. You think you're helping, but actually, you're just making a huge mess.
But wait, the origin story actually gets way more dramatic than just a clumsy rowboat passenger. There's this mythic, almost cinematic origin story dating all the way back to the year 1303. Picture a massive sea battle in the Sound of Mull in Scotland. Two galleys are facing off, one led by Alexander de Inzelis, the other by Angus Og. Now, Alexander's flagship had this brand new piece of tech, a hinged rudder. As the ships brutally brushed past each other in the chaos of battle, legend has it that an enemy oarsman shoved the flat of his oar right between the rudder and the rudder post. The oar snapped, but the blade stayed stuck, completely disabling the flagship's steering. So, sticking your oar in might literally trace back to a medieval naval sabotage tactic. How wild is that? Let's move along and see how this builds, because we can actually trace the documented timeline of this phrase right up to the modern era. As I mentioned, it pops up in the 16th century in that fantastic longer form, to have an oar in every man's boat. Jump forward a few centuries to 1885, and it successfully makes its way into classic theater. Specifically, W.S. Gilbert's famous comic opera The Mikado, where a deeply frustrated character complains, "You must put in your oar." And it certainly didn't stop there. By 1974, it was being featured in classic science fiction, specifically appearing in Ursula K. Le Guin's beloved novel The Dispossessed. Actually, let's take a closer look at exactly how Ursula K. Le Guin used it, because it is just brilliant. She wrote, "An old advisor, Ferdaz, liked to stick his oar in even when it steered the boat off the course he wanted." I just love this so much. She takes this figurative idiom and so cleverly anchors it right back to its literal nautical roots. She's obviously talking about a character giving bad advice, but by specifically mentioning that it steered the boat off the course, she reminds us exactly where this phrase comes from in the first place. It's just a masterclass in writing. Of course, geography plays a huge role in how we use idioms too. If you happen to live in Britain or a Commonwealth country, stick your oar in is a totally standard, well-understood phrase. But if you head over to the United States and say it, you might get a few blank stares. Instead of an oar, an American will usually tell you to put your 2 cents in. It means the exact same thing, offering an unwanted opinion, but the cultural framing shifts entirely. We go straight from the open sea right into the wallet. And even within dialects that totally know the phrase, tiny little variations can cause quite a stir.
There was actually this really fascinating debate on an online language forum about the famous Canadian author Margaret Atwood. She used a very slight variation in her writing, opting for stick in your oar instead of the more standard British stick your oar in. Well, according to the forum users, this tiny shift in word order accidentally led to a rather cheeky double entendre. Because she introduced a hypothetical oar being stuck into places it didn't belong, readers immediately equated the oar to a male body part. It really just goes to show how incredibly sensitive language is. You move literally one word, and suddenly you've planted a completely different, much more scandalous image in the reader's head.
Okay, let's transition away from the nautical history for just a second, because other cultures absolutely experience this exact same human frustration, but they use entirely different metaphors to talk about it. We are officially moving from nautical oars to culinary condiments. Instead of ruining a boat trip, other languages frame unwanted advice as totally ruining a good meal. Let's see exactly how they do it.
And this brilliantly illustrates the point. In French, to meddle is mettre son grain de sel, which literally translates to put in your grain of salt. Over in German, the expression is seinen Senf dazugeben, meaning to add one's mustard. Just think about the logic here for a moment. A chef meticulously balances all the flavors in a dish. If you just walk up and throw in an uninvited grain of salt or a random dollop of mustard, you aren't adding value, right? You are complicating and completely disrupting the dish. It is the exact same concept as the extra oar in the rowboat, just swapped out for the dinner table.
So the crucial point here is that while human annoyances are totally universal, the way we express them is just beautifully diverse. We all have people in our lives who love to give us unwanted advice. But whether you picture them causing a massive splash in a rowboat, tossing unwanted salt into your soup, or aggressively squirting mustard all over your plate, well, that all depends on the cultural lens you're looking through. Which brings me to my final question for you. Which cultural idiom best describes the meddlers in your own life? Is it the extra oar, the pinch of salt, or the uninvited mustard? Just think about that the next time someone tries to tell you how to do your job. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember to always keep your ears open for the incredible history hiding inside our everyday words.